about that part of it. Okay, welcome to the Risk working group meeting. I will put a link to our meeting notes in. I have a separate. Hang on, I got real fancy and created a separate tab or a separate browser window for this, because then I'll share the notes. Here is the link to the notes, and I will share. These are the Risk working group notes. Today is July 28th. You can see that I just entered a fake. I don't know if any of you know who Robin Yount is. He was a player for the Milwaukee Brewers who started in the major leagues at the age of 18, was the MVP a couple of times, lost a World Series in 1982, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm sorry, Sean, but I think you've got the wrong demographic sitting here.
I know, right?
For that reference to go over. I could be stereotyping, and there may be other fans, but
yeah. No, there was actually a big COVID outbreak on the Marlins.
Oh.
So they're starting to cancel Major League Baseball games. I think it's back and it'll be gone in a week.
Oh dear.
It'll be the shortest baseball season ever. But enough about COVID. So the things I have we have on the agenda that I kind of carried forward from last time, and are tag classification work,
oh, good.
forks, and some discussions about pull requests, stakeholder influence, and code complexity. These are our metrics we might be able to work on during the meeting. But one thing so we had this spreadsheet of the labels, how many times labels were used across 9 different collections of repositories. Right. All of those repositories have been updated, and so some of these numbers are nearly double at this point what they were. So Kate went through and did a classification of process checks, solicitation, a classification called classification, don't confuse me. Affirmation, is that affirmation?
Yeah, affirmation.
Signaling, let me make that wider. Wow, it needs to be even wider. Maybe I should just, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna wrap, format, text wrapping, wrap. Okay. And so this was kind of the code section that Kate developed, and she went through the most used codes and put them in a bucket. And we talked through this at one of our prior meetings, and I think generally agreed with the classification. But one of our questions was, okay, so a label is used so many times, but sometimes repos are dominant. In other words, so if I'm Kubernetes, I always like to use Kubernetes. I pick on them as like the gigantic super active repo. So one of the questions we had is which tags were used by the most repositories, so the most distinct repositories. So I determined distinctness using a repo URL, because sometimes we could have some collections of repositories that include a small number of overlapping actual repos, right? So more than one party might be interested in analysis of Kubernetes, throwing them out there again. So essentially this is on the collection of, I have to look really quick to see how many total repos are in that collection. I believe there's 13,000 repos, unique repos in this particular collection. It's just a sample. And so these are the ones that occur in the most distinct number of repos. And I think, I'm not sure, I don't know if I can split my, let's see, I don't know if I'm able to split. Let's see, page style. I don't think I can split a browser screen and share it, and my screen is too gigantic. But I guess if, sorry, go ahead, Kate.
No. One of the things I was just sort of wondering when I was thinking about the repo counts is you tend to have, to use your CNCF and Kubernetes, they tend to all be sort of within the same umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering to what extent some of these are sort of like those umbrella, ones in the same umbrella tend to share same cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just wondering if that's a dimension to think about here.
It probably is. So so things under CNCF
Yeah,
might
or
be,
under Open Embedded, because they've got their own, cultures of things, and
okay.
not Open Embedded, things like that.
So, okay, let me look at
Or like
these
the
two.
Debian, things that are working more in the Debian ecosystem will follow certain patterns.
I'm making some notes here. And this kind of comes back to a discussion that we've had with the to-do group about, do you have that CNCF link handy by chance, Elizabeth?
I don't, sadly.
It was like CNCF.
I can, yeah, I can dig for it.
CNCF landscape, I think, was the page.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just dig
Yeah,
for it.
here it is. I found it. It's landscape.cncf.io.
There you go.
Yeah, I've got it too.
And to Kate's point, I think what you're suggesting is that we consider which of these buckets. Well, these are, so these are all of these considered CNCF projects, or like?
They're also related within the CNCF.
So CNCF is like, for example, this is pretty gigantic.
Well, CNCF isn't quite all of them, I think. I think these are, parts of the whole ecosystem. It's an ecosystem mapping. But if you look at CNCF projects, just a second here, let me give you the link in the chat.
I think they've grayed out the ones that are not CNCF projects, if I'm looking at this.
Here. There we go. Here's the link. These are the ones that are properly CNCF, the ones that have graduated, the ones that are fading.
Getting chat when you're sharing your screen is always a little tricky for me to figure out the UI on, but I did it.
You can also, on that page, you can filter by their relationship. I'm not sure if that's how you got there, Kate, but on that landscape, there's a filter on the left.
No, I just knew that there's a project page sitting there. I gave you the link.
Filter. So CNCF
under,
relation.
Yeah.
So if it's any kind of a CNCF project.
So you can, go to like member products and projects.
And basically, if I click both, would I consider member projects to be part of CNCF? Or are these more likely to follow the conventions of their owners? Kate, what do you think?
Well,
I don't know what's the difference between a member project and a CNCF? I assume it's one that was sort of adopted under the umbrella after it was made.
Yeah, it's basically, it's been put under the CNCF, and it has incubation, which is what's going to establish the set of cultures around it. And that's why I was thinking that there might be, common behaviors that are prescribed for CNCF, and then therefore the tagging. I do know that there are common behaviors for things that are, being packaged for Debian and, working inside the Debian ecosystem.
So if I was to look at graduated, I would expect to see more consistency than if I looked at incubating. And sandbox, early stage, sandbox is top secret, or oh, here it is. Okay, so these are the sandbox projects. It looks like.
Yeah. And these are things that are.
Kube Edge. I'm curious what that is, but not curious enough to spend our time on it.
Okay. So, I'm just going to heads up that I still have my half-hour hard stop, guys.
Okay. Oops. That's no problem.
Yeah.
All right, so I have the CNCF projects listed here. So a next cut might be to actually go explicitly after a collection of CNCF projects and compare them with not CNCF projects. Would you say that's the largest ecosystem that is probably common across the CHAOSS community? Because certainly everybody talks about.
Yeah, well, I think there's a high overlap between CHAOSS and CNCF based on the open source offices that are there.
Yeah.
To do so.
Yeah, and yet I know some of the places I pull repositories from are probably, is that for under CNCF?
No.
No, I wouldn't think so. Okay, so some of the places I'm pulling repositories from are not, I mean, I think there's a fair number of them that are not CNCF projects, but also a fair number that are. So I should look at that for sure and break it down. I guess if we can put them into ecosystem cultures, that will be interesting to see the differences. I do think it's useful though, because when I looked at the text that was at the top for a number of repos using these things like bug enhancement, I don't know that it was like kind bug. I guess bug was pretty popular, and so we have some confirmation. And so I think the next thing I'll do, or anybody that wants to do it can, is sort of cross-reference. I would expect some correspondence between how many repositories are using a label and how many times the label is used, but I think identifying the outliers is probably a next step. Because the questions that we wanted to answer with these labels, Kate, are sort of, they're focused on how effectively they're using them. Are they reinforcing practices? What subsets are used where? Which ones might be associated directly with risk? And
the ones that are associated, like, the bugs and the issues are the ones actually associated with risk. So that a lot of the safety, some of the, I'd say the safety standards that I'm being exposed to right now seem to care about what are all the known bugs known effectively. And if it's known, has it been mitigated type of deal. And so the bug indicators on issues are one way of starting to signal this. The issues could be more than just bugs.
Yep. Critical, I think, is probably a good one. And other similar ones.
So it's the classification ones, I think, opposed to the affirmations.
Yeah, oops, hang on. I'm about smarter than myself. So one's with the category of classification. Okay.
Well, I think affirmation and negation are, put a question mark behind it because that's sort of the hypothesis. So I think next exercise is probably to sit there and go through those ones that are showing up in multiple repos and just basically add the classifications and see if that illustrates anything.
Okay. You want to do that?
You want to give me that? Yeah, if you want to give me that, I'll do that between now and the next meeting.
All right.
Just make sure I've got the links.
Yep, they're in the notes here. I'll just put AI CHAOSS.
Yeah, fair enough.
And then, I guess maybe I should put that under like another bullet that says classification of this list.
Add classification. I'll work my way down through the top ones anyhow. Let's see if I can get that.
Yeah, I think going like you did the last time.
Sure.
That. I think that covers us for tags, unless there's, I think we want to do analysis of the tags themselves in this meeting at this point. But I think, I don't know, anybody else have any comments on tagging or questions about what we're trying to root out here?
I have one question on the tags,
Yeah.
especially the bugs and criticals. So are we like ascertaining the quality or quantity? Like more bugs are more risky projects, less bugs, less risky projects, or the type of bugs ascertain the riskiness of a project? Like in what terms are we thinking in those categories?
I think it's more a question of eventually it's going to be, have the bugs get resolved, and is there someone addressing bugs? I think it's the bugs that are open and no one's looked at are the biggest things for risk. But
So
I think
if we, go ahead.
I think right now we're sort of let's see what the landscape looks like and make some hypotheses.
So I guess one hypothesis might be that if we can set of tags associated with risk, then looking at the state of issues with those tags, state of issues and resolution time for issues that get those labels is important.
Mm-hmm.
It can reveal how quickly risks resolved.
I have a general question.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because I'm brand new to this, if you had any sort of documentation and methodology and how exactly you're pulling things. I know you mentioned that you're counting by URLs versus repo names. Like that was just one little thing to just get clarity on what exactly you're looking at, because that might help if I want to have any feedback around it.
Sure.
And then the second thing was, yeah.
Go ahead.
And I was just thinking, as we're talking about what could be indicators of risk, assuming, I guess this is all, I will look at the methodology of how you pulled it so I can know what to ask about.
Yep.
But I'm assuming there are certain file types or branches that might have more influence than others in terms of, say, where the bugs are. Like if the bug is in an owner's file versus something that's more executable, then that potentially has a different risk profile. So I don't know how available that is in terms of what's being pulled, in terms of file type and location within a repo and functionality of what that thing does to know whether or not it should be of higher priority or not.
Yeah, I think this is an important point you're making, actually, about. So the methodology is we're using Augur to pull the data, and so. Okay. We have, and what I've done is I've taken a set of Augur repositories and I've created a sort of a meta aggregation database that pulls them all together into sort of, I don't know, Postgres has this thing where you can make tables that are connected to tons of different databases. And so that's how I'm doing this. And so that's how I'm aggregating the 13,000 in this set, which may be larger when I go actually count it again. But I think making that transparent is really important.
You're going to need to give me access to that repo, Sean.
Yep. Yep. I'm definitely going to give you access to that data. I think providing a public user for that database is a good idea. I just provided the first public user for an Augur database when I released the community reports project earlier this morning.
Oh.
So
where did you release that?
It's in the CHAOSS organization.
Okay.
And it includes the pull request and newcomer reports that you've seen us run for Zephyr, as well as well, that's about what it contains.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Is the methodology there such that if teams want to take and run it themselves, it's there now for them to start doing?
Yes, and it's right now it's connected to the read-only credentials that I put in there for show, so people can play around with it, are just to repository of CHAOSS databases. But I might not publish to the world on a repository the credentials for a read-only user on a metadatabase that spans a whole bunch of Augur instances, because I don't want to have to buy $200,000 in equipment. But I think sharing it within a working group is something that can be easily accomplished without sort of public sharing of credentials. Make transparent and publicly available, or at least available for maybe with credentials. And it's, I mean, anybody that wants the credentials can have them. It's just, you know how it is when you put credentials, even read-only stuff out there on the internet. Just makes me nervous. And so there's queries that I use, which I can share, that have been used so far.
Thank you.
Sure. And there's also, so there's some other things we do with Augur, like verify that the number of, for example, pull requests that we have on our database is consistent with the GitHub or GitLab metadata about the number of pull requests or issues in their system. So we kind of have a strategy for ensuring data completeness as well. But yeah, I think, I don't know, Sophia, do you have ways that you've worked that make, I've worked in academic settings to make stuff like this transparent, and what do you think the best way to make things like this transparent would be? Because the whole Augur infrastructure is a very complex data collection system, and then we're pulling data out of that complex data collection system. And the complex data collection system is transparent, but the data we collected is, less. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm actually working on a similar project internally, and it's, for me, I've been focusing on trying to just sort of list out the schema and sort of things that you could actually look at within the database. So if you didn't have to expose the tables themselves, but knowing the types of tags or schema or categories that you can query against, and then generally what's in it. So you don't necessarily have to expose the database, but I would expose potentially the query so that you can see how you're counting and what you're counting. And then knowing the query itself and knowing the schema and schema available, then I can ideally extrapolate what other things you could run on top of the same database. Like, I think for me, that would be sufficient to get an understanding of what it is and how you're using it, as well as what else you learn from that, and potentially expose knowing the general GitHub API and what types of things you could pull from that data set in general. Then ideally you can also say, knowing this is the schema that the Augur data set is pulling in, is this sufficient to answer this question? Or knowing what's available in GitHub, is there other things that we would want to aggregate into it? And then I'm less familiar on the limitations of what Augur could support in terms of how you use that data set and what you want to aggregate. But I'm learning, so I got to start somewhere.
Yep. No. So that's fine. Like I say, you just gave me an action with my name.
I know.
I was going I can't do anything there. I'm making sure that this is for me, not for you. And so we're all good.
I just noticed I had left your initials there, and I'm like, no, that's not what I intended at all.
Yeah, like I say, if I can see how to do it, I'll take the action. Otherwise, no. Anyhow,
all right,
guys, offline then.
All right. Thanks, Kate.
Sure.
So the other things is that, Vinod, did we release a candidate metric for forks under this release, or did in the common working group, or did we not end up getting all the way there? I don't remember.
I don't think so. We have released in the common.
We didn't release forks. That one's in the early stages.
Okay. And so another one that's been proposed is stakeholder influence. And I think this one was proposed by, I don't remember person who was here last time, Stefka, maybe? Does anyone remember? I don't remember yeah, I think we worked on this one last time, and it's I'm not yeah.
Let me look at the Google Sheet.
The what? Yeah, the
Google Sheet.
Oh yeah, and this one does look like it was last edited at the last meeting. It's not. I don't think it was.
So working title, it's not mentioned even here.
Okay, maybe it was the meeting. I think it was Johan Lineker who was the one that proposed that initially, and he was not here last time. So we keep it on the list of the metric that were being developed. So Vinod, can we ask you to maybe take an action item on the making progress on forks?
Yes.
And pull request discussion was one. Anybody got a particular interest in? Oh yeah, well I guess pull request. I do not understand how Google decides that different tabs are signed in as different users. So pull request discussion, essentially the amount of conversation that surrounds a pull request and whether it's accepted or declined. So in Augur, we have mean comments for all closed pull requests, and then for the slowest 20, and we have a few other metrics that are available. I can take an action item to work on this one since we have the data. Sophia, what kinds of things are you looking at or interested in that might be different than pull request discussions or stakeholder influence or code complexity? I know you've been on the call, but how can this working group serve your interests since you're here?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about, I guess, trying to think about privacy lights here, but mapping out dependency points within a project. So say the number of owners, maintainers, approvers that are getting things moving forward. And so essentially not the bus problem, but more looking executionally how many people are in that path and how much that changes as a way to detect whether or not losing that person will disrupt that workflow or how many workflows, or knowing that, I guess, as a Google example, we have one individual who's on like over 100 different repos and the approval changes because he's been out for so long. But like he's a backlog, and not that we can identify individuals, but trying to have a little bit better of a mapping view of how approval chains are consistent changing, how dependent or not dependent they are on subsets of individuals throughout a project.
So are you trying to look at the bus factor through and identifying the individual?
I have looked at bus factor a bit, yeah.
You're not worried about projects failing, though. You're worried about projects slowing down, it sounds like.
Projects slowing down or getting, I guess, getting hung up if things are shifting too around. But maybe this is just a hypothesis that I haven't looked into as much. I'm not as familiar with Augur and the CHAOSS tools yet, so I think for me, my action item is to look into better understanding these things and how to use them. I've mostly been working in BigQuery and GitHub datasets on BigQuery. It's that's what I have accessible, and that's what I started with. But I realize that's not the only point of information. Actually, your comment on measuring the consistency in data between them, we know that the archive data is a bit lossy. So it's not necessarily even the best thing to look at, even though a lot of my initial analysis has looked predominantly at the archive event stream. And I can tell you when it went down and how much data we lost recently. So I know it's not complete.
Yeah. And I mean, as long as the data is in the repository or its platform, we get it. I think with the archive, I think they're doing such a continuous job that if it's like they just have spots, I think, where if it's broken for a period, it's not like they have a mechanism that goes back and gets it.
No, we just lose it.
Yeah, and if those, I mean, that might not be such, if it doesn't go, if it doesn't go down that often, you probably are not, you're not getting like, I'm sure you're not getting, I don't know enough about it, to be honest, data quality wise.
Going down is not the biggest problem. I think it just drops things. This is the amount of requests coming in sometimes maxes out, I guess, the input, or however the input is being processed by the server. So we know that there are a certain amount of logs that are dropped, and that is variable. There's one point in time when someone did analysis on it and found up to 20% of logs are being dropped. But other times I don't think it's that lossy. So I think what I've been mostly looking at is the deviation between the monthly polls and the yearly polls. And we are seeing deviations of the hundreds within thousands of a ratio. So like if you're looking at a number of 10,000, then in the monthly database, it might be like 10,700.
Yeah, so it's
like seeing deviations about that size.
Okay, those are pretty significant. I mean, depending on where you are in the release cycle.
Yeah.
When you have that loss.
So that's why I'm only really looking at that for overarching trend data and comparisons, and not very actionable to do data now, because it's not, we can't really define it out.
Yeah, but no, I think those are very risk appropriate questions, because there are some, I think we've historically looked at what is the likelihood of a project continuing to be sustained, but there's also, when projects are very important and evolving quickly, bottlenecks, I think, are another risk to progress. If I'm depending on a project continuing to make forward progress and it doesn't, then that's a problem. So yeah, I encourage you to look at the metrics we've released, just to see what kind of metrics exist. And also, I'm trying to think, I will try to think of the best way to, well, I'll share a bunch of this information inside of, I think, the risk notes afterwards. I'll just include them as part of the risk group minutes, even though they're not part of our meeting, and then email you all when, I'll just email the CHAOSS mailing list when that's back online, when I get that done, probably tomorrow. Give my to-do list today. So, any other questions that anyone has on risk? I mean, we have, I guess, code complexity is the final outstanding metric that we're developing, and that's one that we have measures for it in Augur. So we use a tool called SCC, which employs the Kokomo algorithm for counting complexity, and it's in a table called repo labor in Augur. I'll just illustrate that really quick. So it's always things like, when you see this table, you'll get an idea of, really, it would not be a lot of work for me to build a query that summarized this, but essentially it goes through every single file in a repository and calculates the number of lines, which ones are code, which ones are comments, which ones are blank, and then a code complexity number, which is very often 0, indicating that it's a pretty simple file. But some files are more complex. And I've seen JavaScript, like giant JavaScript files, get super high numbers, but these complexity numbers can then be used as a proxy for calculating relative increased labor cost of maintaining a piece of software or developing a piece of software. And essentially, when you find a non-zero or a non-1 level of code complexity, the more of that you have and the more lines of code that are involved, the higher your labor cost for maintaining it. And we can actually store that as well. But right now we just store the data that we could use to calculate that, because everybody's labor cost is different. And so telling somebody what their labor cost is isn't necessarily always a productive endeavor. So, well, if that's kind of where the risk group is today. Any other questions or topics that anyone wants to bring up before we call our meeting has technically 8 more minutes if we want to use them, or 7 more, but I'm okay not using all the time. I do not feel like all the time needs to be used. Should we say goodbye? Or does anyone want to bring up anything else? Yeah, I think with the to-do items that I have here and that Kate has, I think by in a few days I'll have some of mine done, and by next meeting Kate will have some of hers done. So we'll start to develop a clear picture of. Wait a minute, that was not mine. That was develop a clear picture of where the data comes from, which will be helpful, and start the development of a couple of metrics and try to move some of our metrics towards release during the interim period, because I think I guess we've got 3 more days left in the current review period for metrics. And I don't believe we did some interim releases, but I don't believe we did any releases that were like new in the release period in this working group, which is what it is. All right. Well, if there's anything else, I guess I'll stop the recording, say thank you, and